Today we are doing a DAW deep dive into our Dance Gavin Dance cover session. So this session is really going to show you how good Odin 3.1 can be at lead guitar and those higher octave sounds. So first we have at the top all of our effects and orchestral stuff. I'm not going to go too deep into this. For the violins, I used Nucleus LE, the light version, though I'm going to be honest, I had expected more of this. Previously I used Symphobia, but I wasn't a fan of that either. I really haven't found a violin library that sounds actually realistic to my ears. Maybe it's because I used to play violin and so I can spot it better, or maybe I'm just not very good at programming them just yet. If Midi sounds not real, very often it's going to be user error. Then this is another track of violins, basically beefing up the mix a little bit because this song can be quite vocal heavy. Sometimes you have like 3 or 5 vocal lines playing at the same time, filling up the spectrum. And so because we were trying to focus on the guitars, sometimes the mix might be a little more empty. That's when we added some violins. Then we have a piano, just stock from Logic during a softer section, but we'll get to that. And then very minor risers and hits. Again, that's the type of stuff that you can get in the Bifrost effects pack. Now next we have the guitars. This is of course going to be the star of the show. There's quite a few weird things going on here. First of all, here we have chirpy, whatever the F this is. I don't actually know what it is. This is a guitar profile, and so I just transcribed everything from there, and it has this really weird percussive moment. So I copied it over, and sure, it added something to the mix, but it's a really weird thing to add. This might have been an acoustic guitar in the mix doing those percussive hits, but I'm not sure. I just added it because it was in the guitar profile. Then we have the lead guitar. This is going to be the thing where we focus on most this video. Then we have some clean guitar, because yes, Odin 3 can also do that. Then we have the rhythm guitar, which in this song honestly might as well be a lead guitar as well. There's very little down-tuned chord stuff, and whenever it's playing chords, it's still really way high up. And then in this verse section right here, it's also doing a pretty lead-ish riff, not so rhythm heavy. And then finally we have some more crunchy lo-fi rhythms later on, though I'm not sure we used this section in the final cover because I try to keep it short and sweet. Then we have the bass, which is as always going to be Sanguine bass. And then finally one big drum bus, once again provided by Chord Studio. So let's dive into the guitars. So first, I guess we'll start with the chirpy, whatever the hell that is. Really nothing too interesting. I just grabbed a bunch of dead notes and it's spamming those across the whole thing. Again, I'm gonna assume this is supposed to be some acoustic guitar where you're playing some dead notes to add some percussive elements, but it's very low in the mix, it's not too important. Now for the lead guitar, first let's go over the Odin 3 settings, because these are incredibly important. Sometimes users send me something like, oh, this lead, I'm having kind of trouble with it, and then I ask for their settings, and maybe the settings are just very odd for lead playing. So first of all, for these leads, we have it on the neck pickup. Even though sometimes you might play your leads on the bridge, especially in these super high gain type of songs that are between rock and metal, the neck really isn't used that often. I find that Odin 3 with this neck pattern just sounds a fair bit warmer. And so if you're playing very high up on the neck and you don't want those piercing highs, it can sometimes still be nice to just turn on this pattern. Then next in playing, we have the force vibrato on, and the reason I did that is because if you check this lead playing right here, it's all very short notes, and then whenever there's a longer note, it's one of those hell loud ones where you don't mind having a little bit of a vibrato. And if you then scroll through the whole MIDI, there's actually no chords to be found. So your force vibrato is never going to mess anything up, it's only going to add flavor. And so that's exactly what the function is for. It's going to add realism to your slower playing, and if you don't have chords anywhere, it will never get in the way, and you don't have to manually draw vibratos. Because you absolutely could, you know, you could go into pitch bend modulation, start drawing these vibratos like crazy, but that would take so much time, whereas here it's just the flick of a switch. Now in string select, this is again very important. On mode, we're on auto, and then position 4. So position 4 is going to make it so you're playing a lot of your leads right here. And while it is quite high up, and you might actually actually be playing it on your real guitar right here. I just find that position 4 sounds so nice and warm. I sometimes just prefer the timbre of it. You will notice that for our rhythm guitar, we're doing something different, however. Then finally, in advanced, we have the pick attack and force on, but the impact at 0.0. While Odin 3 is by default going to be at like plus 5 decibels, which means when you turn off your amp, you will hear the pick attack being way too loud. That is actually really awesome for rhythm guitars. When you want that pick attack to just slam you in the face with very heavy riffs, that's all cool. But on these leads, that would be far too much. So we turn it down to 0.0, that's where they will sound actually just natural. And sometimes I do even find that if my lead playing is very, very fast, I even like turning off this pick attack feature. Finally, for tuning, we are in 6-string E standard, which is what the song is actually in. While I love the extended baritone range of the 7th and 8th string on this instrument, of course they are going to sound very thick and warm, and that is not something we necessarily wanted for this track that's overall very high-end, high up in the octaves. Very bright. Sometimes if you're low notes then suddenly are played on the 8th and 7th string, that's just a little bit odd. And so putting it on the actual proper tuning for this song made a lot of sense. But again, you want to experiment with that because we've had covers where the original song might be on a 7th string, but we are having it on the 8th string mode. Or the original song is on the 6th string and we have it on the 7th string mode. You really want to experiment with that to get the most out of Odin 3. So that's the settings. Now let's dive into this MIDI. So if you don't remember what this sounds like, this moment, it's basically the chorus riff. So let's solo that right here. There's a couple things going on. First of all, we have these little fake slides that I've done in the past. So right here, you have this tiny note between two notes and then the pull-off key switch to kill the attack of that tiny note. So this means you're going to just have the slightest little transition sound that gives you the vibe of a slide without having a real slide. Here we really only want that little transition, that little extra noise, because a real player isn't going to necessarily play notes perfectly from one to the next. And then at the very end of that note, I'm once again using a small palm mute copy of that previous note, but just extremely short to create some artificial release sound. Again, the engine is going to do that by default already because of the human noises, but sometimes I like to control it or add a little bit extra. Now for the second part of the melody, once again we have that same fake slide pull-off trick that I've used so much. However, the second time we are doing a slide, it is a real slide. It's going to be with the auto slide key switch function right here. So have a listen. So here you're going to have the fake chirpy, whatever I like to call it, sound. It's not really a slide, it's a little bit of a transition noise, but then the second time we're going to have the auto slide key switch perform an actual slide between these two notes. So here, it's just the percussive noise of the movement, whereas here you really heard that slide. And as always, because these are two very distinct sounds, you're adding life to your performance. You're not just spamming auto slide key switches across the board. Now for the next part of this melody, we have hammer-ons and pull-offs going on. This bit is tapping, and so you're going to see that the first note here is picked. Then we have a hammer-on, a pull-off, hammer-on, pull-off, and so forth. And then once again right here, we have the auto slide key switch, another auto slide key switch, and then later on, the fake transition noise once again. And that is basically the whole melody. It is just going to play the same thing over and over and over again. And the variation in the original song then comes from the vocals. And it just keeps going and going and going. Now at the same time, you have rhythm guitars, which are also very high up in the octaves. So let me quickly show you what's going on here. Maybe before I show you the MIDI of that, let me show you the settings for this guitar so you see the difference. First of all, because this is rhythm guitar, we are not on the neck pickup pattern, we are actually on bridge modern. So bridge modern is a bit of a more modern sounding pickup, whereas bridge def has a much bigger mid spike. So if you want that chunky, big, low mid type of rhythm tone, then you might want to be on bridge def, where if you want that more modern sound, bridge modern might be what you're after. Then in the playing, we have force vibrato off, because this guitar does absolutely have chords, and so you never want to force vibrato chords in my opinion. I'm sure some people will find a way to use that to a cool effect as well, but so far I haven't. Then in string select, mode auto, but this time position 3. While the warmth of these higher positions is awesome, position 4 is just a little bit too much for a rhythm guitar in my opinion. In advanced, we are once again on 6 string E standard. So now, let's pay attention to the rhythm guitars in the mix. So now let's have a look. Here I am trying to do some strumming. So basically the very first note is going to be picked harder on the bottom string, and then on the next chord, the top string is going to be picked harder because that's where you're starting. You kind of need to imagine that you have your right hand with a pick in it, and you're going string by string. So the first string you hit is going to be hit the hardest, and then you travel back up picking, and so that's why you have this variation here. Now I will say, after all is said and done with all of the distortion from the amplifier, the difference isn't that massive, and so if you're just writing or you're just doing pre-production or anything like that, it's really not worth spending time on this. This is very much just those last few percentage points of difference, but it does help with humanization overall. Now one thing I didn't do was our pull-off technique to reduce the pick attack on the chord afterwards. So if you've seen our other DAW deep dives, you may sometimes have me place pull-offs here randomly to make your chords less consistent, but because the lead guitar is so much louder in this piece and it's already very busy, I kind of felt like our rhythm guitars benefited from that extra pick attack. We didn't just want this endless droning noise because it's a very, very busy mix already. And what you're also seeing here is some string selection key switches. So I noticed when I didn't have this on, that this chord in particular sounded way too bright and it was kind of poking out weirdly. So by placing a string selection key switch here, I just manually changed where this chord was being played. Similar story right here, and then once again you see that muting noise here when I'm trying to create a silence. Once again, right here, these were way too bright for me, so I changed their strings. You could say that these are still quite bright. They are still poking out a little bit compared to the chords, but that is also the case for the original song, so I just kept it in. If this were my song and I was personally going to release it, I would have probably made these stand out even less, maybe even automate them down here and there. But who am I to change the artist's vision for their song? And of course, within context, it does sound really, really awesome. Now, if you have a look at the bass, it is very, very simple. I am just spamming notes. Honestly, I think sometimes people get a little too fancy with their key switches on bass. They're trying to use like mutes and pops and all of this stuff. And while Sanguine can perform them absolutely, again, you can go into key switches. We have all of these key switches. We have the thumb slap, finger pluck, all of that goodness. It's just pretty unnecessary usually when it's going to drown in the mix. And what we really need this bass to do is provide a solid foundation, be extremely in tune, just hold down the fort basically, but not stand out too much. There is a point later in this song where it's going to stand out a little more, and that's all cool, but there's a time and place for everything. Now for the next section, this is all tapping. So if we solo the guitar right here, as you can see, there's a lot of key switches going on right here. So it's picked and then instantly pull off, hammer on, pull off, hammer on, pull off, and so forth. So there's almost no pick attack here anywhere. It's just all tapping. And then once again, one of the notes was standing out a little bit too much to my taste. So I used a string selection key switch to change where it's played, changing the timbre and overall making it fit the rest a little bit better. As you could hear, there's almost no pick attack. This is all tapping. And then it just plays the same thing for a very, very long time. Now, at the same time, the rhythm guitar here is actually still playing a melody. It's not doing chords or anything like that. And here there's nothing special. I did no key switching, no string selection, no fancy techniques, nothing whatsoever, because I feel like Odin just nails any type of riffing without much work whatsoever. Now, you could argue that maybe right here you could have done some hammer-on stuff. It did sound like that could have been hammered on in the original song. But again, once you put it into context of the mix, all of that drowns out so much that it doesn't really matter. Sometimes less is more. Now, for the next section, we're going to stay in the rhythm guitars because there's actually lead guitar silence for a little bit. Very rare in this song overall. So let's have a look. This is where you have some chords, and then in the original song, it's super staccato. It's like da 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 da, and so that I really wanted to have in here as well, so I overpronounced it. So right here, once again, you have the down pick note being picked harder, and then the up pick note, down pick note, up pick note. Then right here, we have that silence into a mute to have a little bit of that release. And especially here, because we're doing that staccato, very aggressive muted stuff, it's a dead note right here. So it does have a little bit of that pick attack in there to really pronounce that. Now, if you wanted to, you could probably turn this into a pull-off as well with a pull-off key switch if you want this to be less aggressive. And then before you have your next chords, you also have fully muted chords right here. But it sounds really, really sick. And here also in the original, it's some aggressive muting going on. You have that da 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 da. So we have these dead notes right here. And they're completely filling up the silence because I noticed when I made them too short, the muting happened almost too quickly and it became unnatural. It sounded like a human wasn't muting these strings because of how fast it was. And then right here, this run up is with hammer-ons. So these last two are hammered on. This first one is picked. Once again here, a mute noise, and these are all dead notes. So before we get to these clean guitars, let's have a look at the leads right here. So I did something really weird here because when I listened to the original, these are just all picked equally hard, but the second note's pick attack kind of drowns because it's not being picked super cleanly. It's so fast that your guitarist gets a little sloppier, that's only natural. And so I wanted to get the same effect by making these next notes much weaker. So as you can see right here, 68 compared to the first note being 125. And then once again on every silence, I added these little additional mutes. And then this last run right here is actually the same as the rhythm guitar, just these two first notes I think are an octave lower, and then once again we have those hammer-ons. So then we get into the clean guitar. Now I will say in this session right now, I have Fenrir on this clean guitar, and Fenrir is based on a EVH3, which is a very, very gainy amp. While it does do cleans, you know, on the lower settings, you kind of have to think about like the 5150 amp, where even if you put it on clean, it's not all that clean, you know, it's still quite crunchy. And so on the final mix, we ended up using a different amp to have real cleans, whereas here, again, it's just crunchy, but I think it's fine enough to show you how this was programmed. So as you can see, because this is clean picking, we wanted it very, very gentle. All of these are below 60. So this is 51, 56, 51, 59. And these chords, the notes are being picked very gently, one by one. And something very important to realize is when you are opening a MIDI from Guitar Pro, which I did for this, these slower chords, they are not ringing properly. When you just export it, it will look like this. All of these notes will just end right here. And so what you're really telling Odin to do then is you're saying you're going to play this chord, and then on the 50th beat, you're gonna slam your right hand into that bridge to completely kill all sound, and then afterwards you're going to gently play the next chord. That is obviously not how anyone would ever play these clean chords. So the first thing I of course did was I made these notes longer. I wanted to ensure that when you're doing that very slow one by one note chord picking, that these ring out till about the next time they are picked again. And so you can see that across the whole board, all of these chords are kind of bleeding into each other, and that's what's going to give you a far more realistic result. And then right here, of course, we also have that piano going in, because I believe if I check the original, they have acoustic guitar coming in here, and I don't really have any nice acoustic guitars, so I said, F it, let's just use piano instead. And then afterwards, we go straight back into the more rock style with the rhythm guitars doing these very aggressive, cool chords, so have a look. So nothing too special going on here. Once again, just the trick I showed you earlier of changing where the extra power is coming from when you're strumming, and then one of those little mutes to really accentuate that silence. But again, if you're just writing, you're trying to get some pre-pro down, these differences in sound from where you're putting the accents aren't quite as important. So right here we're back in the chorus, and then afterwards we get the tapping again. And at the end of that, you then actually have some interesting bass stuff going on. So if you have a look, we have some thumb slapping, popping goodness going on right here. This is, I think, the first time in these deep dives where I actually do something to the bass that isn't 127 velocity, just being spammed with no articulations. So we first have a key switch for a slide, and then we have all this slapping and popping basically. And then that leads into the next section. So the next section I don't think we put in the final video because I didn't find it as important. I found the most impressive, awesome part about this song really the chorus. Like, this main riff is just so cool. But so that is the session. Overall, I'm very happy with how this turned out. I hope you enjoyed. If there's specific songs you want us to cover next, let me know. You know, maybe there's a style that you really want to see from Odin, because of course my goal is to prove to you that Odin can literally do anything. The only requirement really is that the song should be pretty known. If you want to reach as many people as possible with Odin 3, our covers should be relatively widespread songs. But so thank you so much for watching and happy producing.